So we're going to talk about risk and diversification, and these are some big ideas, some really important ideas in the field of finance. So I want you to pay attention. Diversification, all that refers to is including many different assets in a portfolio. So it's not diversification to say I have 300 shares of IBM stock. So I've got one share of IBM and another share of IBM and another share of IBM and another share of IBM. Or even to say I have stock in 100 different companies, but they're all engaged in the computer industry. It's, different assets. And the reason it's important is because it allows investors to maximize the trade-off between total risk and expected return. Again, we don't like risk. In order for us to take on more risk, we need expected return, and diversification gives us that best trade-off. So something we don't like, we can get the most of something we like for a given amount of something we don't like, or for a given amount of something we do like, get the least amount of risk. Diversification lets us achieve that. So when we talk about diversifying away a type of risk, what do we mean? We mean, first of all, that the portfolio's value of that measures less than the weighted average of the individual assets value. So again, if you've got some measure, let's say you've got 5 assets in there, and they all have some measure of 10. But when you look at the whole portfolio, it has a measure of 7. That's diversifying away. There's some cancellation, and so if you take the average, it's the value for the portfolio is actually less than that average. Another way of thinking about it is you can reduce or eliminate the amount of a risk simply by increasing the number of assets in the portfolio. So in our case above, if you had one asset and it had a measure of 10, the portfolio measure would be 10. Suppose you added another one, you might do some computations and come up with, oh, now it's 9, 8.5, 7.6, 7, and you keep doing that. And as you add more and more and more, there's more cancellation, and the measure for the portfolio goes down. So that's what we mean by diversifying away. So let's see how it works in what we're talking about. Really important assertion. You can diversify away unsystematic risk. And in particular, a well-diversified portfolio has no unsystematic risk. So let's see how that works. Suppose we have this portfolio, and it's just got 5 assets, 5 stocks, because that's how many you can nicely fit on here. And let's look at unrelated, unsystematic surprises. So this is the things that would drive unsystematic risk. So stock A has a surprise and it affects it. Stock B has a surprise, but it's unrelated to A. So if A is good, B could be good, or B could be bad, or B could be neutral. C has its own surprise. D has its own surprise. E has its own surprise. And imagine a portfolio with thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of unrelated, unsystematic surprises. So each of the stocks is being heavily influenced, the returns of each of the stocks is being heavily influenced by these surprises, but because they're unrelated, on any given day, some will be positive, some will be negative, and they'll completely cancel out. And that's what happens in a well-diversified portfolio. Now, on the other hand, systematic risk, the risk associated with the macroeconomic news, can't be diversified away. The amount of systematic risk of every portfolio, it doesn't matter if it's got one stock in it or 10, or it's well diversified with thousands and thousands and thousands. It's just the weighted average of the systematic risk of the individual assets in the portfolio. And the reason is, here you have a systematic surprise, and notice it's the same surprise for everybody. And it affects everybody. So everybody's responding to that same surprise. There's no cancellation in the sense that there was with unsystematic, where you have all these independent pieces of information. Some are positive, some are negative, some are good, some are bad, and they cancel each other out. And that's why you can diversify away unsystematic risk, the risk of kind of this individual risk, but you can't diversify away this systematic risk, this macroeconomic risk, the way it plays out in the more mathematical is called market risk. So for all assets and portfolios we've talked about, the actual return is equal to the expected return if there was no surprises, plus the effect of two kinds of surprises, systematic, which we make macro, or unsystematic, which we make the individual, for a well-diversified portfolio. Very specific situation. Well-diversified portfolio. Then there's no unsystematic risk, so the unsystematic part of unexpected return is going to be zero every day, on every single day. So each of those individual assets is affected by their own unsystematic surprise. But there's so many of them, and those pieces of information are unrelated, that there's going to be perfect cancellation every day. So since it's zero on any day, it's going to average zero over any, whether it's a day or 10 days or whatever term you look at, it's going to average zero. But the systematic portion, not likely to be zero on any given day. On any given day, that one surprise, if you have a simple model, there may be a bunch of them, but they're the same. The surprise that affects everybody, not likely to be completely neutral and completely zero. However, over the long term, it will average out to zero. If it didn't, it would be predictable and it wouldn't be a surprise. So again, this and what we've been talking about, really, really important. Therefore, for a well-diversified portfolio, the return is going to be equal to the expected return. How risky is it? That's what you get if there was no surprises, plus the effect of surprises that are systematic from the macroeconomic perspective. The individual pieces of news has no effect. On the individual stocks it does, but not on the portfolio because they cancel each other out. So therefore, the total risk of any asset or portfolio is the sum of systematic and unsystematic risk. But for a well-diversified portfolio, it's the same because, well-diversified is any portfolio. It's just one particular kind. But as we've tried to establish, unsystematic risk is zero, so the total risk of a well-diversified portfolio is simply equal to its systematic risk. Let me go back. I thought there was another line that came up there. So the only thing that leads to a well-diversified portfolio's returns and prices jumping around is systematic risk, the effect of these macroeconomic surprises. So that leads us to something really important. We've talked about it. Expected return is tied to risk. Investors can eliminate unsystematic risk. If you hold a well-diversified portfolio, you can eliminate it. Therefore, even if you don't hold a well-diversified portfolio, because you can eliminate it, unsystematic risk, there's no compensation for bearing it. So even if I have one stock and it's bouncing around like crazy because of unsystematic risk, I don't get any compensation for the risk that's associated with the response to that stock to individual news. Why? Because if I held it in a well-diversified portfolio, I could have a portfolio that wasn't affected by unsystematic risk, and so no one's going to pay me for taking on risk that I can avoid. However, through diversification, you can't reduce or eliminate systematic risk. It's just the average response to the way we've modeled it, the particular macroeconomic news. Therefore, you are compensated for taking on systematic risk. And this leads us to one of the most important assertions in modern finance. Expected returns are based on risk, but more particularly are based on the level of systematic risk that an asset has. So an asset is bouncing around for two reasons, systematic risk and unsystematic risk, but the only thing that matters with respect to expected returns is systematic risk. That's the risk that matters with respect to expected returns.